So today is an extremely special day. I am so honored to be here with Michelle Chianera with Alludo. Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
I'm super excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And you have so much knowledge to share on this very, very important and timely topic. But before we jump in, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your story. In other words, as a younger person or even as a child, was there something that inspired you to greatness, or maybe something that was really challenging and that you decided from an early age just to, ascend because of it?
Yeah, just to dig a little bit into my personal life. I'm actually the first of my immediate family members to go to college. I'm the oldest of two. I have a younger brother, 2 years, and then of course my mom and dad. My dad was an electrician, or is an electrician. He still is. Oddly enough, the man's 80 and he still is motivated to go to work. Maybe I took something away from that. Anyways, he's an electrician, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So my exposure to building a career and investing in my future was limited. And when I made the decision to go to college, I have to be really honest. I probably didn't take it as serious as I should have, because I really didn't have that clear aspiration. My parents, of course, I learned a tremendous amount from them. But what I was surrounded by was not corporate America or investing in this big career. And what really grounded me, I was in my third year of college, and my father had told me very early on, when I started my college career. He said, "Hey, look, if you commit to making an investment in your education, and investment's a key word, I will commit to supporting you." And what he meant my investment is that I would show return. So ultimately, I would deliver on my grades. So every semester, I had to show him my grades, and that would be my opportunity to get invested in. And it was my third year. I didn't take college as serious as I should have. And I had to go deliver some bad news to my dad. And my grades were well below par. And basically, there really wasn't a conversation. He took a piece of paper, he wrote down an 800 number, he slid it across the table, and he said, "You don't want to invest in yourself, I'm not going to invest in you." And from that moment in time, it was like whiplash, right? Financially whiplash, of course, because I was in my early 20s and not really able to pay for my college, but I had financial aid. And that really carried with me as I moved through my career. So, what I reflect on in that given moment is, in order for me to get an investment, I need to make an investment. So whether it is an opportunity for me to get some training as a part of my work experience, or to get exposure, or to be on a special project, I always remember that moment, because if I don't demonstrate the ability to invest in myself, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate the ability to invest in that specific initiative. So that's carried with me, and it's something that I constantly reflect on, because I do believe that companies look for employees that want to make an investment in themselves to only better who they are in their respective role or their job.
So I am so glad that you brought that up, because a lot of times things that evoke emotion in us really get imprinted in our memory. And I
Right.
imagine when that paper slid across the table, it evoked a little emotion.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
Panic and emotion.
Yeah. And also sometimes the things that we fear the most or that we think are the most horrible end up, I would imagine in hindsight, you're almost grateful, or you are grateful that that happened.
Absolutely, because it switched my perspective, right? It switched my perspective from, if you don't want to invest in yourself, I'm not going to invest in you. I mean, that's really powerful, right? So that forces me to put myself first in the things that I want to do going forward, and maybe not let something pull me back or send me to the side. Like, hey, I'm going to invest in me because this is the outcome I want to achieve.
Yeah, and it seems like too, you probably walk the walk and communicate that to your teams and so forth, and also it resonates too from a coaching perspective. Coaches have coaches, and so I think it's important that you point that out, because if we're going to say something, we have to do something. So it kind of rings similar to me that if I'm going to talk to someone about the importance of coaching, I better as well have one too.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I love that you brought that up. And so earlier in your career, or even recently, was there ever a time when you really doubted yourself, but you took on, I just watched Richard Branson's masterclass. And so I have to say, I love his motto, but you decided to screw it, let's do it. But when your head was just saying, I don't know, I'm not really sure. But so was there a time when you doubted or had some fear, but you just decided to go after it anyway?
There's many stories to tell, recent as well as going back many years. But one that was pretty pivotal for me, and actually changed the trajectory of my career. I spent a lot of time at Cisco in a partner marketing capacity. Tremendous amount of passion around that function of marketing, and I knew in the back of my mind that I aspired to move into leadership positions and ultimately play a role in leading a entire partner marketing function. But I wasn't quite convinced that I was ready to do that. And luckily, I had a really amazing leader at that time. And she kind of knew that that was the direction I was looking in. But she also knew that she needed to get me uncomfortable and get me learning new aspects of partner marketing so I'd be ready for that role. And she came to me. We had some attrition on the team. She came to me and said, hey, look, I want you to get to know a couple of the new routes to market that are going to be critical to the growth trajectory of Cisco. And she named the 2 routes to market, Sheryl. And I was like, I had to literally Google it. I was like, ISV, oh, independent software vendor. What do they do? And she was like, that's exactly what you're going to go figure out. I was like, no, hold on a minute. You got to explain this to me. Like, what do they do? Why are they important? And she's like, this is the point. I was terrified because she was going to then turn me over to the sales leader that was running that business. And that sales leader and I were going to have a conversation to see if I was a good fit. So I literally probably had 2 hours to get my head around what this was. And let's be real, like that's not enough to get yourself fully educated. And I was horrified. I mean, I was literally, and I'm like one of those people that I prepare for conversations that I'm going to have. And this time I did not get a chance to do that. I got to do maybe 30 minutes of a Google search and maybe a quick conversation with somebody that might know something more than I do. And I got on the phone with this particular sales leader, and like in this state of like, I got to prove myself, I started literally regurgitating what I read on Wikipedia. And she was like, whoa, hold on, slow down. I want to talk a little bit about your approach and how you're going to think about doing marketing with these types of partners and some of the things that you've seen as a success that we could potentially scale. And where have you had blockers or obstacles that you've had to overcome? And I was like suddenly this sort of weight just kind of came off of me. And I was like, okay, this is like familiar talk. And I started speaking about everything that she had referenced. And, in the end, she was like, look, I knew going into it that you didn't know everything, but I wanted to just see what capacity you have. I wanted to see, obviously, the capability that you have to offer because you've been in this function, but, are you able to think differently? And, from that, my learning from that moment is I don't have to know every single thing. I just need to know what it is that particular audience is looking for and to accommodate that. And if I would have just spent a few minutes digging into, hey, what's the sales leader going to ask me, or what are they looking to think about as it relates to this role, I could have avoided all that panic and probably delivered on a message that she was looking for. But I had to go through that because ultimately, in the end, I learned something. And I think that's where, when you have fear, like overcoming that fear and acknowledging what you learned out of it that you can carry forward, is the best experience. It sucks when you're in the middle of it and it's really uncomfortable. But when you get over that hump, it's definitely something that you carry forward and learn from.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to really spotlight something that you said that's so important. And it's apropos to what we're going to be talking about in terms of nurturing our future leaders in tech, or emerging leaders, excuse me. And that is really maybe thinking about how, like, the possibility of transferring skills. So, in other words, sometimes people see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. And so, you had a very short window of time to try and squeeze as much stuff as you could about this thing, but in reality, you didn't need to know all about it, and so probably it might have been better to build up your confidence and think about your
100%.
strengths and what you do bring to the table, because most things we can learn. And I at least from what I've seen from working with many global teams, is that men are good at this.
Very good.
They're like, I'll be amazing. I'll be amazing. This is what I know I'm good at, and I'll learn the rest. But, because of, and I've done some research on why this happens, and a lot of it has to do with some cultural indoctrinations and some other things. Women, we've got to, we're box checkers. And so what you said is, really important, and to just be open and to broaden your vision and be in touch with what you love and what you're good at, and then assume that you're up to the task.
I agree 100%. And I'll just fast forward where that experience applied to something recent. So I made the decision to leave Cisco a year and a half ago. I'd been at Cisco for 21 years, and I wanted to go to a software company. I wanted to go to a SaaS company because that's where technology was headed. I could have spent all my time talking to myself about, I don't have SaaS experience. Cisco doesn't predominantly sell software. I know everything about hardware. I mean, I flipped the narrative. Like, what does SaaS company want from me? Right? What is it that I experienced or skills that I have that they would need? And that took a lot of the pressure off. I could have gone straight to that, stick my head in the sand and like try to figure it all out, but not end up figuring anything out. So it's a big lesson learned when you go through an experience like that. And it's like you come out going, I just put all that pressure on myself. No one
Yeah.
was putting that pressure on me.
Yeah, 100%. And the message too that I get to that I take out of this, that I hope for everybody's listening would get out of it too, is that you get to decide. And I've written so many articles, but decide, side obviously means that awful thing. It's death, right? CID, it's just the root word. And D means of. And so decide literally means death of any other option. And so you just decide, and you don't have a plan B, and you figure it out. So I really love that you brought that up and that you really went for it. And I appreciate your transparency, because it's not always easy to talk about,
No.
but it's so powerful.
Absolutely.
And so has there, on kind of the flip side of that, a lot of times success isn't a straight shot from A to B, whether you're a woman in tech, whether you're an athlete, whether they're just kind of in life in general. So in your career, has there ever been a time when something's gone sideways and you've needed to get up and dust off? And can you share how you recovered?
Gosh, what story do I pick? I'll share most recent. I'll go back to this career transition that I recently made. I was really clear with myself on what I wanted to get out of the next 5, 10, 15 years of my career. I knew I wanted to be a CMO. I knew I wanted to stay in tech, and I knew that I wanted to be in a place where I could make impact and see see a growth trajectory. And I really believed that was at Cisco. You don't stay at a company 21 years. So as I started to continue to ascend in the company, I started to realize that, the next step might not be an option for me. The next step would be go be a CMO at Cisco. And that might not be an option for me. I live in New York. And I am pretty grounded here, for personal reasons. And I also knew that Cisco was going through a massive transformation as a company, and the importance of bringing in people with particular mindset, I recognized and acknowledged. And as I was as I was celebrating my 20th year, I kind of reflected and said, am I going to get what I want? If I look at those 3 North Stars, am I going to get what I want? And I made the decision to take it into my own hands. And by the way, I love Cisco. I am grateful for everything that company has done for me and how it shaped me for who I am. But I knew I had to make a move. And that was probably one of the hardest decisions that I ever had to make. My ego played into it, of course, right? I mean, I would have loved for someone to say, hey, Michelle, come meet the CMO at Cisco. That didn't happen, right? I would have loved for someone to say, hey, we really want to see you do X, Y, Z. And I kind of knew that it's time for me to go do my own thing. And I started to interview at companies that were like Cisco. I won't name them. And I quickly realized, like, this is not about a company. This is about what's motivating me. And I realized that I wanted to make a pretty drastic swing. And I could see myself being in a company that was much smaller. And as I started to talk to companies that were, Cisco companies that I was talking to, I realized that that's actually what I'd been looking for. But I'd spent a lot of time worrying about my own ego, worrying about my perception, worrying about, am I doing something silly? And I really went after what essentially drove me, and my narrative changed. Yes, I wanted to be a CMO. Yes, I wanted to be in tech, but I wanted to be in tech for a SaaS and a software company because that's where the industry is going. And then being in a smaller company, I was like, you know what? I want to look at PE-backed and venture capital funded firms, because these are areas where you're able to drive change and see a growth trajectory. That's why these companies invest in them. And I made the move, but it took me about 6 months, and it was an emotional roller coaster for me. But once I really figured out what it is that I wanted to do and how I wanted to pursue my career, it just became easy, and the decision was natural. But I spent a lot of time having to pick myself up and be like, oh, well, I should have been the CMO at, big company XYZ. And, and I'm at a place right now where I'm gaining a ton of experience, and I'm leveraging a lot of great experience that I had when I was at Cisco. So in the end, it works out. I just needed to go through that emotional roller coaster first.
Yeah, I again appreciate your transparency and also vulnerability, because a lot of times these choices are difficult. And for anyone who's watching, the best time to make these decisions are when you're kind of calm and at peace.
Yep.
So I don't know if you took some time for kind of a pause, but I really want to commend you for listening to your gut and your heart, because our minds kind of get in the way sometimes.
They do.
They can talk us into or out of anything, and especially when the ego gets involved, then we're really in trouble. So good for you for really listening to your gut and your heart. And now must be you must have a lot of joy knowing that you're in the right place, and by feeling that peace, then that really means that you made a really great decision.
Of course. Yes.
All right, well, let's then transition in. I feel like a lot of the things that we've been talking about are really apropos to how to really nurture our future female leaders in technology, or emerging leaders. And so if you have a really interesting perspective on being a part of a very large organization, and now being part of of a smaller organization. So when it comes to nurturing our female leaders in tech and making sure that they ascend, that they stick around and ascend up into leadership, are there similarities and differences between being able to do this successfully in a big organization versus a smaller one?
I would say yes and no. I've had sort of the same mantra for a handful of years around what can drive success as a female, as a leader, as a person in tech. And I would say that I've used these three things that I'll share in both my big company and then now in my new company. And it's really three areas. The first is tech is such um, an industry that changes constantly. It is never the same. Tech in general is obviously very, very dynamic. And the next thing is always on the horizon. And I believe whatever discipline you're in tech, you really need to be forward looking. And that's something that some people have to train themselves to do. And then some, it comes natural. I spend very little time looking back other than to benchmark, because I know tomorrow I'll make a decision and I'm probably going to have to re-evaluate that decision in a short period of time. Having that forward-looking mindset really resonates when you're in the tech industry, just because of the nature of technology in itself. The second thing that I would say that is incredibly relevant is relationships. Relationships, and I'm going to say the word networking, but I view networking in a very different way. It's not what it was, where you go to a cocktail party and you have a conversation. Networking happens organically. It's constantly happening, right? You're networking with people internally. You're networking as you're engaging with your vendors, or if you have an indirect selling model, your partners. And I've found that networking and relationship building is critical to move with agility. In the end, you're never going to get consensus across the board. We're human beings. We are intended to disagree. But as you start to build alliances and followership through networking and relationship building, this really helps you to drive forward your organization's agenda. What do I mean by that? If I'm going to go and ask our finance group to give me an investment in XYZ marketing initiative, I'm far better off to go hand in hand with my engineering lead, who, by the way, is just built all the features and benefits around a product that he or she needs to go monetize, because that investment needs to see a return. I'm more likely to be listened to, and I'm more likely to succeed. So building those alliances, building that followership so you can move with agility, it's all foundational to relationships. So I don't underestimate that. And it's not something you do, it's something you're always doing. I'll have conversations with people that I'm coaching or mentoring, and they'll be like, oh, I got to make sure I build a relationship with so-and-so. I'm going to send them a note to see if they'll meet with me and get to know me. It's like, no, that's not going to work. You got to add value, right? This is great advice, because I was at Cisco when this happened. And I swear I tell this story over and over because it's so relevant to what I'm saying here. I had this gentleman who was in product marketing, and he wanted a mentor. He knew that if he was to reach out to me as a mentor, he was going to need to capture my attention. So what he did is he figured out what was top of mind for me as it relates to, in that time I was leading America's field marketing, to delivering on my goals and driving outcomes for the company. And one of the areas was security. He was a security product marketing manager. He didn't call me and ask me to be his mentor. He called me and he said, hey, listen, Michelle, I know that security is top of mind for you, and I would love to be a sounding board. I would love to spend time with you just to help you best understand it so you can make the best decisions that you need to make as you're investing in the America's Field Marketing function. I was like, whoa, I love you. Like, this is great. Yes. Can we set up a bi-weekly one-on-one? Guess what happened naturally? I ended up mentoring this guy. And I got something out of it, just like he got something out of it. And then the last one I'll say, and this makes people typically very type A people, which I'm type A, but I learned this. 80% is good enough. 80% is good enough. And if you strive for perfection in this industry, you're going to fall behind because it moves so fast. And the biggest thing that as a leader, as a contributor, that I believe we can do and shift our mindset is we need to execute and optimize, execute and optimize. And that's why that 80% thing is something that I believe in. Yeah, sometimes we execute it 95%, sometimes 100%. But we got to move. And that is the nature of this industry. And I don't care what function you're in. That's something that's incredibly important to be successful in tech.
I really love that you bring that up. It kind of reminds me of Seth Godin's book, Linchpin, and he had, and actually have a sticker, a couple of those sticky notes from that book posted in various places. But one of them says thrash early. So in other words, it kind of speaks to what you were saying. It's like, get an idea, put it together, put it out there.
Yeah.
Because you can thrash around with it rather than sitting on something too long and trying to make it perfect. So it's 100%. And I also love the story about the gentleman that added value for so many different reasons, because, he was a manager, but he was very bold, and he intuitively, or he was told that I specialize in something. I may be here and you may be there.
Yep.
I have value and I'm an expert in something maybe that Michelle isn't an expert in. And so I'm going to, speak up and add value. And it sounds like he was also working from a place of his highest integrity.
Absolutely.
From a place of service, and then as a reward, he ended up getting to be mentored. So it really seems like nurturing female leaders they're going to need a little bit more help to understand this, to how can I add value? And that stems from feeling worthy.
Absolutely.
Regardless of me being less experienced, I'm an expert. I love this. I'm worthy. I'm going to speak up to a leader.
Yep. What's the worst thing they're going to say? No.
Yeah. And at least you've tried. And then, so from a leader's perspective, though, what if, how would you recommend for leaders to really be proactive to nurturing, emerging female leaders and to really pull them up and have them ascend into, leadership positions?
I think that's a really great question. I think it starts with the leader first and foremost, right? There are leaders that I think naturally people want people to succeed, of course. But I think you have to be really deliberate. There's this program that, and you may be familiar with it, it's called the Multiplier Effect. And the premise of it, I think, is amazing. And basically what it is you make this pledge to a diverse candidate and woman, fill in the blank. And you make a commitment to spending time with that person, to helping that person actually achieve their goals and their dreams. And that requires you to invest in levels that go beyond a 30-minute call on a monthly basis, right? It's helping that individual to, one, see themselves for what they can be. I think that's the start. And I often find women that I mentor that they don't see how they can make an impact. They tend to go toward this like, well, no, I don't know if I can do that, or I'm not sure that that's best for me. And I think the best leaders turn the mirror around and say, here's what I see in you, and help them pull that out. So that's one thing. The second thing is just give people a shot. I have this philosophy with my team, male and female. I predominantly have females because marketing tends to be more focused on females. But I put them out into the wild. Like, hey, you go represent our organization and you get in front of this executive. I know you can do it. And just the fact that I tell them that, they're like, oh, great. And suddenly their confidence level goes from here to here. Like, she really, truly believes. And the last thing I'll say is, as a leader myself, I really look for what it is that their superpower. I look for, what are you so good at? And the coaching or the guidance that I will give is keep amplifying the heck out of that, because you're amazing at it. And I find once these female leaders get comfortable with, okay, I'm going to show my stuff off a little bit, right? I know I'm really good at this. They get this level of confidence and more of their superpowers come out. So it's nurturing it at an individual level where you show the mirror, you put them in positions that they're like, whoa, and you really emphasize what they're really good at. And that's when I see these female leaders ascend and start to move to different levels in the organization.
Yeah, so it seems like it's really important to have some proactivity on both ends. And if you don't mind spending like a moment talking about, well, what I think is really an elephant in the room, and that is, and there's also, I think in the McKinsey report, they have a lot of research on it, is that women is a general, I'm trying to put this politically correctly. Sometimes women tend to help women more if there's a big gap in between their leadership. So in other words, to help someone more their junior, but we can get a little more competitive as the gap narrows. So can you share a solution for that, or a pledge, or why it's important, for us to, extend that olive branch, especially as women get closer to our positions?
Yeah, it's such a relevant topic. So look, number one, I mean, we've heard this said a million times. Women need to support women, period. Right? I mean, it's just, if we can support each other, it only benefits each other. So that's a very generic statement. I would suggest not looking at people based on how much time in their career, based on how long they've been working, like whatever category. And I would start looking at women that are more senior than me, more junior than me, that are peered with me, and figuring out what is it that this woman can offer as it relates to helping me be a better leader. I have a woman that I have worked with on and off for years. She was more senior than me at one point in my career. And this woman, and then eventually she took a step back and was my peer. And then she ultimately came and worked for me. And why I sought out this woman is because she thinks completely different than I do. Completely different. And by the way, when she worked for me, she probably wanted to kill me, and I did want to kill her on a couple of occasions. But
you know who you are if you're watching that.
I value her perspective so much because she makes me see things that I otherwise wouldn't see. If I just keep going with things that I'm comfortable with, and people that are maybe my in my same number of years in career, or if I just spend time mentoring younger women, like, I look at what is it that this person has that I know I either need to be self-aware around, and if I'm in a situation where I know I'm not going to be good at it, I've got a person that I can reference and they can help me. I think if people switch their perspective and look at it as how can you work together to help offset each other and make each other better, and set aside number of years and seniority and titles, and like, who cares? Like, I mean, I learned, I I talk to people that are early in their career, and I'm like Googling their language. Like, what, wait, hold on. What are they saying? And then, I'm asking, like, I want to know, right? Because that's going to help me be a better leader and a better marketer and a better whatever. So I just think we got to drop all these like like reference points. Like, just look at it as an opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe drop ego,
Yeah.
which again gets in our way. And then it seems like too, it's important for us to be a little bit vulnerable and a little bit kind of surrendering a little bit and trusting that it is going to be better, kind of a win-win-win. In other words, it'll be a win for you, a win for the other person, and a win for the company if you can allow them in and commit to developing each other.
100%.
Yeah. And so as we wrap it up, what is the one thing? There were so many amazing things that you shared, but what's the one thing that you would leave everyone with, and in order to really nurture and help that next level, that incoming emerging female leader in tech? What would be their call to action?
My call to action is own your leadership style. And what I mean by that, as wherever you're at in your career, you're going to learn what kind of leader you are. And I think the biggest mistake that men make is they try to be somebody that they're not. I'll tell this really short story. I was tapped on the shoulder to represent one of our executives at an event. It was a pretty high profile event. I was going to be presenting. And of course, as I said earlier, I'm over prepared. Mm-hmm. And I basically spent all this time thinking about, gosh, who do I want to emulate? Like, who do I want to be like? Who's an amazing speaker? Who is very charismatic? Who's somebody that owns the stage? And I spent all this time worrying about how I was going to be perceived. And it's funny, at that time, I also had a business coach, and she said, you know what, you should record this presentation because this can help us shape your presentations going forward. Great. Do the presentation. It's recorded. I send it to her. She calls me 2 days later, and she's like, who is that woman on stage? And I was like, what do you mean it was me? And she's like, no. It was not you at all. In fact, all the goodness about you was not on stage. I tried to be very poised. I tried to say every word perfect and be very succinct. And that's not me, right? I flail my hands around. I talk a little fast. I don't necessarily have these eloquent sentences. I'm incredibly passionate when I speak. I'm not calm, and my demeanor is very, and it was a wake-up call, because if I'm going to try to be somebody I'm not and not own who I am and my leadership style, I'm going to be living a pretty uncomfortable life in corporate America. So from that point on, I was like, you know what, forget it. I'm going to be, who I am. And I'll tell you, from that point on, yeah, I mean, there are times where I should have and could have done better. But I was much more comfortable in my own shoes versus somebody else's. And I really owned who I am and how I lead and what I believe in. And that has had a massive impact on my career.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just whether you are an emerging female leader in tech or a seasoned female leader in tech, to really own your leadership style and also encouraging others to do the same, I think will really help in the mission to develop our female leaders in tech. Michelle Chianera, thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to continue to follow you.
Thank you very much.